Dr.
Thanks,
Nandita D'Souza, a very, very warm welcome to you on behalf of IMA Marga. A very warm welcome to all our doctors and all our viewers and all of you today. We are back again after a very nice CME sometime back by Dr. Abhay Bhave. I think Dr. Priyanka was not there that day, so
I was unable to join. Yes.
yeah, it was a wonderful CME. So today I'm sure because we have been waiting for Dr. Nandita for a long, long time. I think ever since March I've been chasing her and she's been busy with a lot of things, that she was caught up with a lot of things. And at last today we have her. Right from the time we took over, Dr. Nandita, this is for you. Our main motto has been mental well-being of the children specifically, and we have been having lectures and a lot of things pertaining to the mental well-being, especially I think during the pandemic it has taken a huge toll on almost everyone. So today's talk is going to be more adolescent centric, talking about the mental well-being of the adolescents and the teenage group. And I think we, at least in Goa, we don't have anybody, a better resource person than Dr. Nandita D'Souza to address this, which is an adolescent group, I think, is sort of never addressed, neither by the pediatrician nor by the general, by the people who see adults, by the doctors. So I think adolescent age group requires a lot of attention. It needs, even we need to be aware of what are the problems of adolescents. And I think today, I'm sure is going to be an eye-opener for all of us. And now, after welcoming all of you, I will hand over the further proceedings to Dr. Priyanka. But just on 2nd July again, we are going to have a talk by Dr. Harshad Kamath on MIC, and he's going to tell us about entire thing. And it is going to be a state level CME organized by Madgaon IMA. So on to you, Dr. Priyanka. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Nandita, for giving us your time today.
Thank you, Dr. Babita, and a very warm welcome to Dr. Nandita, madam, for accepting our invitation and giving a talk today out of a busy schedule. I welcome all the delegates for attending this CME. Dr. Nandita is the director of the Setu Center for Child Development since 2005. And as we know, Setu is a unique service that is provided by multidisciplinary team of mental health professionals for the assessment and management of developmental and behavioral difficulties in children, with focus basically on autism, on learning disabilities, and parenting issues. Dr. Nandita is a recipient of multiple awards. To name a few, she's been awarded the Changemaker 2018 award by Young India unit of CII. In 2019, she featured on the cover of Jan issue of Goa's oldest magazine, that's Goa Today, and awarded today's Person of the Year. In 2019, she's received the Incredible Goans Award for Social Empowerment and many more. Dr. Nandita has multiple publications in both national as well as international journals. And she's also been a TEDx speaker and delivered a talk in 2016 in April, wherein it was held in Panjim on inclusive education that's impossible. So without much ado, I think everyone is eagerly waiting for Madam's talk, and I would not take any more time and hand over to Dr. Nandita. Over to you, Madam, to start the talk.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much, Babita, for that warm welcome, and Priyanka for that very embarrassing introduction. I really wanted to go under the table. But it's really wonderful to be here. And thanks to Harshad, too, who's been kind of coordinating with all the planning of the dates, the title of the talk, and so on. I feel like I'm attending a family function actually, because I can't see everybody, but I can read the names of many wonderful colleagues and doctors who I've worked with over the years, and I realized it's been ages since we've gotten together. So this is, I suppose, kind of substitute for that. So thank you so much for having me here with you all, and I do hope that we spend the next hour. You feel that you've gone back with something that you can use in your practice. What are my credentials? Well, everyone, my family members call me a recycled teenager. So I even have a T-shirt that says that I'm a recycled teenager. Maybe I should have worn that. But yes, I'm fascinated, of course, as you know, by child and adolescent development. And this period of our lives is something that has no one has ever faced it before, and there's so much to learn, so much to share. So I look forward to kind of sharing some of the ideas and information that I have, and I hope that there'll be lots of questions and a good discussion at the end. So once again, and I'm now going to share my presentation. I hope it comes through. Okay, if you can just confirm that it can be seen.
Yes, madam.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. So my title is Teens in Trouble, and we'll be talking about adolescent mental well-being, especially during this very, very difficult time. I'm not going to be going into mental illness as such, and I know that there are many experienced psychiatrists here today, but focusing more on like how this pandemic has been such a huge kind of crisis in the lives of children and young people. So this is what we'll be covering, the effect of this COVID-19 pandemic just on children's lives in general. We'll be talking a little more about what we call adverse childhood events and how they can create stress and what this stress does for the brain, and a little kind of a deep dive into actually what happens in the brain, and therefore how it manifests in terms of children's emotions and behavior. Some focus on the detrimental effects on teens during this COVID-19 pandemic. And lastly, that what can we do to help? Again, simple measures that doctors as well as parents, teachers can take. And lastly, the question time. So, as I said earlier, the COVID-19 pandemic has been unprecedented. And for many people, children were kind of not a priority because it was in terms of, they're not affected by the pandemic. They don't get the infection, and whereas the, elderly and then the comorbid adults, they were the ones who got all the focus. However, as time began to pass, we realized that children and adolescents, even though they weren't getting infected, the mental health effects were very, very great. And that is what we'll be focusing on today. So in terms of the social isolation, and initially everyone was very happy, no school, we're at home. Even parents were quite happy because they didn't have to go to the office. They could be at home, spend time with the family. But as the days stretched into weeks and into months, there was this distress that started being experienced not only in children, but also across the family and the community. School shut down. Again, this was something that, though many children complain about going to school, school actually has a very strong safety net effect. First of all, there's a routine, and, even in terms of the social connection with your teachers, with your peers, as well as even the bus driver who comes to pick you up. And there is just a kind of a rhythm to the day which we take for granted. And that was snatched from us. And it, of course, led to a lot of emotional distress too. Changes in routine. Before, when we went to school, we went to office, we would know the difference between a Monday and a Sunday, right? Now, everything has kind of merged into one kind of very similar looking type of day. Decrease in physical activity, of course, because children couldn't go out into the playgrounds, and of course in school there was no PE. The offset for that was that screens were being used more, not only for entertainment, but now even for classes. So before, parents would say, like, don't use the screen. Now they had to ensure that the children had access to screens. And that also led to a lot of unhealthy eating, sleep problems. Again, the more screens, the more our sleep is delayed. If we sleep late, we're going to wake up late, and the whole routine goes for a toss. parental stress, which has a lot of effect on children in terms of the distress that was caused. So many parents have lost their jobs. Many of them have gotten infected. Family members have gotten infected by COVID-19. Many of them have lost their lives. And because of this kind of community upheaval, many families, through the loss of jobs, loss of incomes, have actually been put into poverty, and they're worried about where the next meal is going to come from. And the issue of bereavement, I mean, so many people have lost their lives, and now even young people. And this is an effect that is going to last a long, long time. So you can see that it's been like a tsunami of kind of change, of distress, of anxiety, and so on. So let's talk about adverse childhood events. So these are things that happen in the child's life, and which have a great impact on the neurology or the brain development of the child. And these are things which happen right from birth up to 17 years. In the past, we've spoken and looked at things like neglect, both emotional neglect as well as physical neglect. So poverty causing lack of food, homelessness, as well as abuse, all the forms of abuse, which cause a lot of trauma in the children's lives. Domestic violence, where there was conflict between parents, and even physical violence. And often children, even though they're witness to violence, it creates a great degree of helplessness, and they're still victims, even though they are witness, and the violence may not directly be incurred by them. Then divorce and separation, parental substance abuse, mental illness, these were the factors that were looked at in the past. And we know that these events, when they happen in the child's life, when the brain is developing, it does cause trauma, which affects the neurobiology of the child. Now you throw in the COVID-19 pandemic, right? And, there's an excellent review of various research studies which have been done looking at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on child growth and development. And we now know that COVID-19 pandemic, because of its features, is another form of trauma in children's lives. So ACEs act across three realms. It could be things within the household, like domestic violence or your abuse and neglect, alcoholism, parental conflict, divorce. The second is in the community. And here it could be things like poverty, a loss of jobs, right? Discrimination in the community, and so on. And third is the environment. Not only natural disasters, and certainly COVID is a disaster which is across the world, but also things like climate crisis and migration and so on. Now, if you look at the COVID-19 pandemic, it actually acts across all three realms. So the way households have changed, or the impact of the domestic violence, lack of neglect of a child's physical as well as emotional needs, parental mental illness. We know that many parents are really struggling with increased levels of anxiety, depression, substance abuse, because that's the only way sometimes to forget all your troubles. Secondly, in the community, as we spoke about, loss of jobs, poverty. And third, the pandemic is definitely a disaster, which is natural, man-made, we still don't know, but it is across the world. So the ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic are everywhere. Now, how do ACEs result in affecting the growth and development of a child? What happens is that when there's adverse childhood event, and especially if it's recurrent, what it creates is something called toxic stress. Now, stress is not always bad. We know of good stress or eustress, right? For example, stress helps us to do better. We have class tests coming up, so we make sure we make the effort, we revise so that we do well. That's good because we learn how to, take care of our academic responsibilities. or there's a school concert, we've been selected in the school play, we're quite anxious because we're on stage, people are watching us, but we make sure that we revise our part well, and we practice a lot, and we do a great job. So stress can have good outcomes. At a certain point, stress is little more than that. And even then, if it is not too long lasting, if we have good support, we have what is called tolerable stress. So say, a house move, you've gone from one location to another, or you've joined a new school, or you've lost someone in your family, but you have a lot of emotional support. Yes, it's stressful, but you still can ride on top of it. However, at a certain point, you get what is called toxic stress. And this is that chronic stress in the absence of supports. And when you have a lot of adverse childhood events occurring together over the course of time without any help, the child experiences what we call toxic stress. Now, in toxic stress, because there's this constant, outpouring of adrenaline and cortisol, what happens is that when you have a genetic propensity to any illness, the environment then kind of acts with that and causes that to be expressed. And these are the changes that we see in terms of the effect on the growth, the development, the learning capacity. We know children who have been exposed to trauma actually have IQs which are lower. They may have a lot of attention difficulties and be diagnosed with ADHD. They have a lot of anxiety, depression, and this continues beyond their childhood, beyond their adolescence, into their adulthood, and actually affects their adult productivity. So it is something that we need to understand and look at closely, because it also can be treated. So many studies have shown that if you reduce the adverse childhood event, you can actually save money for the nation and for the world. And a 10% decrease in adverse childhood events led to an annual saving of 3 million disability adjusted life years. 3 million, which resulted in an annual saving of about $105 billion. So you can imagine, if we increase the ACEs, what is going to be the cost of that? And the cost, I don't mean to make it into a purely financial kind of statement. This is the cost of actually on people's lives, where people cannot live to their full potential. Now, ACEs can have lasting effects on various aspects of health, behavior, as I said, life potential, and there is a compounding effect. So when we are looking at children who are already vulnerable for whatever reason, maybe they live in poverty, there's domestic violence at home, there's neglect, the community, there's a lot of kind of joblessness, and now you put in another adverse childhood event, which is your COVID-19 pandemic. Even if they were borderline, if they were in tolerable stress, they're going to get tipped over into toxic stress. And we've just seen how long-lasting those effects can be. From the environment, we're going to look at the brain development now. And, the brain of a human being is constructed from the bottom up, just like you would construct a house. And we know that the brain of a 5-year-old is very different from an adult brain, not so much in terms of the size or the number of neurons, but in actually how the parts of the brain speak to each other through the networks. So the first thing that happens is that there's myelination in the first few years of life, right? And myelination makes all the difference. If babies were born with their brains fully myelinated, then they would be able to do what you and I do. But because their brains are not myelinated, they can only do what is required for survival, which is cry when they are hungry, okay, pass urine, pass stool, move. Okay, so that is a very primitive form of living. However, as we move and grow, the brain gets myelinated, and therefore we start developing different skills. Now, once the brain is myelinated, and it takes actually around 25 years for the entire brain to be myelinated, and the last part is the frontal lobe, okay, which only occurs in adulthood. However, the most part of the brain is myelinated by 5 years, and now what happens during the preteen and the teenage years is that the synaptic connections increase. So parts of the brain start talking to each other better, and your networks are laid down. Once that happens, later on, there is a pruning because we need a very efficient brain. So actually, the gray matter of the brain of a preteen or a teenager is much thicker. Whereas with pruning, it becomes a leaner and a more efficient brain. So what happens is that during late adolescence, there's reorganization of this brain, and it's almost like a network and a wiring upgrade. So we have a very efficient brain of the adult. And what has made all the difference is that the frontal lobe, if you look at the blue part, which is more mature in that little window, right? The frontal lobe is now mature. And that's where, we behave like adults, right? So again, if we look at the brain, as I said, you have the prefrontal cortex, which allows you to pay attention, which allows you to focus, which allows you to make decisions and to do what we call the executive functions, which we'll be talking about in a bit. And at a lower level, you have the limbic system. So you have your amygdala, which is responsible for your emotion, the seat of emotions, your emotional regulation. And this is really well developed in young kids, whereas the frontal lobe takes time to develop. But if you look at young children, their emotions, you can see them very easily because the amygdala and the limbic system is well developed. And the amygdala is very important together with the hippocampus, which is responsible for our learning and memory. This is important for us to survive, right? And in fact, some people refer to it as the lizard brain at the lower level, which is mainly survival. Now, what happens when you have toxic stress, okay, is that this part of the brain, the amygdala, actually, because it's where, the children are very anxious and so on, so the amygdala size actually increases. Whereas the prefrontal cortex and the hippocampus in toxic stress, the size of these two parts of the brain decrease because of poor connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. So here is where your environmental stress is now actually causing neurobiological changes, which will result now in an impact on the functioning of that individual. And the hippocampus is very important for memory and for learning. So obviously, if you have a smaller hippocampus, it's going to impact your learning lifelong. So what happens under stress is that we know that we get what's called the stress response. And this is mediated by your adrenaline, your cortisol, where your brain is in survival mode, you're stressed. So you have an outpouring of these hormones, these neurotransmitters, and your brain has to decide now whether we should fight, flight, leave the scene, or freeze. Right? And you take the example of the caveman, right? The caveman needed to know whether, because there was danger all around, he or she needed to know how to respond to this situation. For example, if there was a saber-toothed tiger there, okay, am I strong enough to fight this creature? Is it better for me to run away? Or should I just stay very quiet and let it go away? Now, over time, we became what are known as thinking individuals, and the prefrontal cortex developed, right? So now we can make decisions. It's not automatic. We can think, is this a real threat or not? Right? And we can choose to decide whether we should respond or maybe we should do something else. However, when children have lived under a lot of stress, and we've already said it affects their frontal lobe, the prefrontal cortex size is decreased, right? What happens is that they're kind of living in that amygdala, and the response becomes very automatic. So even if there's something that is not very dangerous, the response is as if it's of great danger. So if you have a child, for example, who's being stung by a bee, and they've experienced all the pain and all, and everyone, the panic, right? The next time the child sees an insect flying around, even if it's a, fly, they may respond in the same way as they did for the bee. So, in a form of great anxiety with panic. Right, so this is something that we see when children are subjected to stress over time. And in fact, there's yet another F, which is what we call fawn. So there are some children who actually don't show these responses of fight, flight, freeze, but what they do is they become these people pleasers. So they're actually under a lot of stress, and you'll see this even in families of children who are going through, say, parental conflict. They become too good. They're studying very hard. They're very kind. They think that they need to keep this family together, right? And actually, it is a stress response. It's toxic stress which is acting on them. And sometimes we wonder when these children become adolescents and something happens which is really obviously stressful. And then you'll see these children harming themselves, and you wonder what went wrong. Actually, they were already in toxic stress, but instead of fight, flight, freeze, they were doing what is called fawn and becoming people pleasers. And, these two good children who outwardly look like everything is under control, but inwardly they are under great distress. So again, to repeat what I've said, the brain of an anxious person, you have the amygdala, which is there, which is your seat of emotion, and the frontal lobe, which is on top, okay, the higher centers for reasoning and so on, versus the lower centers, which are for feeling. And you can actually draw a line across it and compare it to a house, which has a ground floor and a first floor. And we use this comparison to tell children about what's happening in their own brains. And what happens is that when there's a lot of noise on the ground floor, the child is in the middle of really distressing emotions, there's a hijacking of the first floor. So the top floor cannot do any work. And what we need to do to help children deal with these emotions is actually to build a ladder from the ground floor to the first floor. And the first floor is what we call the CEO of our brain. And Dan Siegel has this wonderful hand model of the brain, which again we use to teach children as well as to help parents understand, where he compares the brain to the hand. And if you put the thumb across your palm, okay, that is like your limbic system. So you have the anterior cingulate, hippocampus, amygdala. Of course, you don't have to tell this to children, but as doctors, I think it's nice to understand. Okay, so that is part of your brainstem, okay, and overriding that is your frontal lobe. And in fact, this part where your fingertips are, okay, that is your prefrontal cortex. So you can see that in state where everything is calm and you are happy, your prefrontal cortex is nicely enveloping your amygdala, okay, and calming it, as well as is in touch and speaking to all parts of your brain. Okay, that's your spinal cord, right? So it's a very good situation. So for example, if you're being stung by a bee, but now you see a flying insect and you wonder, your prefrontal cortex is kind of reasoning and says, okay, it's not making a sound, so maybe it is not a bee, it's pretty small, right? And you know what, I can just go indoors, or I have a newspaper in my hand, I'll just wave it like this so that bee can go away, right? So your prefrontal cortex in your frontal lobe is talking to your amygdala and analyzing, reviewing, and then making decisions. Right now, what happens when you are very anxious, or your prefrontal cortex is not well developed, or you have been subjected to multiple trauma over the years of your development? So your prefrontal cortex, even though you're an adult, has not been able to have that neuronal wiring and synaptic connections of someone who doesn't have that kind of trauma. What happens is now your amygdala is on full alert and it flips your lid. So you've lost the control of the prefrontal cortex on the emotional centers. And that's the emotional hijacking that occurs. Now, if you're the parent or the teacher of a child or an adult dealing with this child, and you're trying to tell them, to reason with them and, say, it's okay, it's just the exams, it's just your, you've been studying all through the year, it's nothing to worry about, you know everything, we went through it. You are trying to talk to the prefrontal cortex. But in a child who has exam phobia, their prefrontal cortex has been hijacked. So it's not going to be effective because they can't hear you. And the more you try to reason with them, the more you actually are exacerbating that panic within them. So it becomes important for us to know how to handle or how to respond to a person whose lid has been flipped. And this is not only children, it is also us. So let's look a little more at the prefrontal cortex, okay, the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer of our brain. And of course, the main neurotransmitter there is your dopamine. And the prefrontal cortex, why is it called the CEO? Because it does what we call are the executive functions. And you can compare executive functions to the conductor of an orchestra, right? So, the conductor of an orchestra is in charge of making sure that whatever music is played is of good quality. So, for example, there may be a string section, there may be the wind section, there may be the percussion and the drum section. So everything has to play in coordination so that the music sounds sweet. If the executive functions were not there, this conductor was sleeping, right, and each one was doing there would be chaos. Okay, so in the brain, what are these different sections of the orchestra? They're your behavior, your thoughts, and your emotions. They all have to go together in coordination. Now, what we can see outside of any individual is the behavior. That's what we see. However, the internal processes, which is your thinking as well as your emotions, we can't see unless they become behavior. But actually, it's the thinking and your emotions that are responsible for your behavior. And your executive functions make sure these work together in synchrony. Now, the prefrontal cortex, or this CEO, is, as I said earlier, the last to get myelinated. And, cavemen didn't have frontal lobes. So it's also the newest part of our brain and hence more vulnerable to insult, to stress. It's closely linked to our emotional, social, and our physical health. And when we are happy, we have good supportive relationships, we are physically fit, we have had good sleep, we are rested, our executive functions work well. However, when we feel isolated, we are sad, we are lonely, we are worried, we are physically unfit, we haven't slept, we are really tired, and of course, if we have ADHD, our executive functions suffer greatly. And executive functions are like our mental muscles, which we need right through life. The more we practice them, the stronger they become. But as I said, if you don't, run, if you don't, use your muscles, no matter how much you've done before, if you don't use your muscles, you're going to not be able to have that kind of motor output. The same way with our executive functions. If we don't use them, or we can't use them because our frontal lobes are smaller, or because we have less dopamine as in ADHD, or because we have had toxic stress, or we have not slept enough, our behavior is going to show poor executive functioning. Now, an easy way to remember what these are is to use the word stop. Okay, so S actually stands for stop. So one very important executive function is impulse control. Impulse control is being able to kind of act at the level of reason, right? It is when we say free will, it is actually impulse control. What is our free will? That we don't act at the level of our, amygdala. So, for example, if a deer, smells smoke in a forest, the deer is going to bolt. Right, that's automatic. But if we were camping in a forest and we smell smoke, we would think, okay, is this a campfire? Is this, smell like trees burning, right? And we would then be able to make a decision about what to do. So that is your free will, to be able to decide depending on what the situation is, as per your reasoning and analyzing. So impulsivity, control of impulsivity is a function of the frontal lobe. A lot of our impulsivity comes from poor self-regulation. We are not able to regulate ourselves. So if you go back to that B example, okay, if a child could not regulate themselves, they just run away. But if that child had good executive functioning, they would be able to say, okay, I can move aside, or I can take this newspaper and take a swing at this insect, right? So self-regulation, whether it is with our emotions, whether it is with our, impulse control in terms of eating, is a very important executive function. The second is think, what we call cognitive flexibility, being able to reason, being able to decide. Third is organization, both in time and in space, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. And the last is to perform, to start something and to stick with it till we finish. So impulse control, being able to think for ourselves and reason, being able to organize ourselves in space and across time, and being able to complete what we started, to a degree of success. These are the executive functions. Now, again, to look at it in more detail, as I said, controlling impulses, it could be our emotional impulsivity, decision making. Many of us make bad decisions and make impulsive decisions, especially when we're on the Amazon website. Impulsive behavior, as I said, self-regulation, being aware of ourselves and being able to modulate our behavior in order to be able to reach our goals. So yes, I want to watch this Netflix movie, but you know what? I have to complete these clinical notes and prepare this report. So yes, I'll finish this first and then I will go and watch my movie. Thinking in terms of problem solving, cognitive flexibility, even if we kind of decide to do something, but we meet with an obstacle, we are flexible. We can think of another solution if we have good executive functions. Organize, putting things in a system, knowing that I have to complete all these things within this possible amount of time, having a plan towards our careers or some future goal. And as I said, perform. This is what we call working memory. The memory that I use as I'm doing something. It's like the RAM of our brain. So what happens if our executive functions go for a toss? And as I said, it could be something like toxic stress, which has affected our brains over a long period of time, or it could even be poor sleep that we didn't do the previous night. One is because we have poor impulse control, we are easily irritated, we tend to overthink, go on and on, not reaching any solution, but just mindless kind of overthinking, making rash decisions, being restless, overeating, things like gambling, all the other addictive behaviors. If we have poor problem-solving ability, low frustration tolerance, so we give up easily because we say, oh, this cannot be done. We lose things if we are not organized. We can't start what needs to be started, even though we know it's important, but we just can't bring ourselves to start it. And we have poor time management. We kind of take too long to do something that should take a less amount of time, or we don't give enough time to something that should take. So we can't kind of gauge how much time to give in an accurate manner. And when we have poor working memory, we make a lot of careless mistakes because our mind is not really on it. Everything takes more effort. So if I have poor working memory, I read an article. By the time I reach the end of the article, I can't remember what was said at the beginning. So I have to go back and again read through it, and we become absent-minded. We get sidetracked. We get a phone call, we attend to that, and we forget what we started out with. So you can see executive functions impacts us all through our day and beyond days into our future. So now the adolescent brain is under stress, and even more so now, right? So what happens during the time of adolescence is that there are changes in the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, where there is an increased reactivity. And those stress sensitive areas, which we mentioned earlier, the prefrontal cortex, amygdala, and the hippocampus, are still not fully constructed. Because those take, especially the prefrontal cortex, takes around 25 years to be constructed. Throw in the COVID-19 pandemic, and you have now the elements to create a perfect storm. Right? So this we have seen on the mental health of teenagers. And I'm sure those of you who interact with teenagers have, witnessed this impact for yourselves. They increase school dropouts. When there's poverty, many of these teenagers now have been pushed into the workforce, of course, where the work is available, and it's unlikely they're going to go back to school. If they had special needs, if they were struggling, also it's unlikely that they're going to go back into school. A lot of mental health disorders, anxiety, depression, post-traumatic stress disorders, substance abuse. Many teenagers now are feeling like, what's the use? They can see people dying around them, and there's a certain recklessness and an increase in self-harm and taking risks. Of course, smartphones, a lot of dependence, not only addiction to screens, but also to other things which come with the screens, whether it is playing online poker or it is pornography. Early age of initiating in smoking, because they're self-medicating themselves to a large extent because they're not getting their dopamine from the other things that they would do in the past, especially from the social kind of networks. And of course, this is going to end up into substance abuse. And as we already know, there's an increase in domestic violence as well as child abuse. Okay, so this is something that is impacting their mental health. Now, what can we do to help? There's lots we can do. There are general measures in terms of what the government can do. Health programs, especially, when the lockdown was first announced, a lot of the programs like the, whether it was the RBSK or the ICDS, they kind of had to close down because everybody was focused on, just dealing with the medical aspects of the pandemic. But now we hope that these programs will be able to reach out to children and adolescents, whether it is with the, like the midday school meal or the distribution of the food and so on to the Anganwadis. Family-centered strategies in terms of self-care, very, very important for family members. This can help to relieve family stress. What we call responsive parenting. So helping parents to understand that, of course, they are under stress and therefore self-care is important. They have to start with themselves first, but also explain that the children also under stress. And I, talked about the example of the hand model, because this is something which is easy to explain and to understand too. An increased opportunity for family fun. Yes, we all together in the same house can be very stressful, but also there are opportunities where families can do things together and spend time together in ways that was not possible before. Academic support is going to be really, really important, especially once schools open up. In primary healthcare, we must put the focus on mental health. There's simple things we can ask, simple ways we can assess and advise. I think we must start with a strengths-based approach and ask children and adolescents what has helped them to make it through these now close to almost 2 years, right? What were their strengths? What were their supports that helped them, go through all this anxiety and stress? And we'll get some good ideas from them about how these can be strengthened further. And of course, mental health services to a large extent have moved online. Now, to go back to what we can do at primary healthcare, there's a simple PHQ-2, it's called a patient health questionnaire. Just 2 questions you need to ask. Okay, easy to remember. One starts with P, one starts with H. So do you experience little pleasure and interest in the things that you were doing before? Are you feeling hopeless, depressed, right? In the last 2 weeks. So again, it's in the last 2 weeks. Score 0 is not at all. 1 is yes, okay, significant amount. 2 is more than half the number of days, so more than 1 week. And 3 is almost every day. And again, the score in these 2, questions, if your score is up to 2, that's okay. If it's 3 or more, then you have an extended version of this, which is the PHQ-9. But as a quick screening, if you have any, adolescent with you, please ask these 2 questions. It won't take much time. And then if the score is more, you may not have the PHQ, but you can definitely refer. The heads, again, where you get into the head of the adolescent, which is, pertains to their home environment, their education, eating disorders, activities, what do they do for fun? drugs, okay, in substance abuse, their safety, okay, both at home as well as in the environment, their sexuality, and of course, self-harm or suicide and depression. Again, this is easily available. I've put the references there. It's a great tool to talk to the adolescent with. It starts with less threatening questions and then moves into more personal questions which are pertaining to that individual. Now, how can we help them? Simple ways: build the boss of the brain, build the CEO of the brain. And there are simple things we can do. For example, adequate sleep, making sure that they have emotional support. Actually, we talk in terms of relational health. We know that relationships are a great antidote to stress. And in fact, even if you have toxic stress, but if you have good relationships, and sometimes it may not be someone in the home, it may be a caring teacher or a caring coach, you can actually, instead of going to all those, adverse effects and what trauma does to you, the brain can actually build resilience. Building self-esteem by telling young people what they're doing right, telling them they're lovable, telling them they're capable, ensuring good health and nutrition, building relationships, as I said, the safe, stable, nurturing care, connections. Physical activity also helps dopamine through the form of workouts, yoga, martial arts. I know children, for example, who've started, learning to use nunchucks, okay, who've started doing workouts within the home because they can't go to gyms. Promoting their interests, again, very often it's what they can do indoors. Now, through social media and Google Meet and so on, they can also interact with other people who are interested in similar interests and get some motivation and support from them. Emotional management is very important. So for the adults, like the parents, stay calm themselves, and unless you've taken care of yourself by doing something you enjoy, it's going to be hard for you to regulate your own emotions. Recognize feelings. So listen, validate by saying, yes, you're feeling upset, use the name and a reason, because your sister is not allowing you to, watch your program, or your, exams have been cancelled, or because your friend didn't call you, whatever's the reason which is making that person upset. Never have discussions with an angry teenager. Okay, you're only going to make them more angry, and you're definitely going to lose the argument. Give them a way to express their anger appropriately. And sometimes children need to do something physical, and certainly, as that poster says, it's okay to be angry, but you can't hurt others, you can't hurt yourself, you can't hurt property. So if you want to punch, give them something to punch that doesn't hurt themselves, doesn't hurt that thing, and doesn't hurt anybody else. And even it could be a thing like a pillow or a punching bag. Okay, some children may want to do some physical activity like jumping up and down. That's fine. But you can't tell them to do it when they're angry. It has to be practiced when they're calm. And of course, things like mindfulness, which just brings your mind to the present. There are lovely resources available online. Stress management, especially for parents, and of course, counseling or referring them to a mental health specialist. Again, explaining to children about the downstairs brain and the upstairs brain. Downstairs is where we feel our feelings. Upstairs is where we talk about our feelings, and that's what we call metacognition, and helping children to use the upstairs brain to regulate their downstairs brain. And one of the steps to build that ladder is to talk out loud about their feelings. And, they can then talk to themselves that, it's okay. Yes, I hate what is happening right now, but you know what? I can deal with this. Deep breathing is like a massage to the amygdala. Okay, so the amygdala is like that guard dog which keeps you alive. However, it's okay for the tiger who's out there. We don't have the tiger in our house, but sometimes the amygdala responds as if you're living with that tiger. And sometimes it's the tiger mother which is in your house. Okay, so deep, strong breaths helps everyone. Moving, because again, all that adrenaline which has come from that anxiety is like a superhero fuel. So it must be used up. Your muscles all tense. Move. It will help you to calm down. And then bringing that brain to the present through your mindfulness or your grounding. And this is best achieved through actual kind of using your senses. So I often tell children and teenagers to have like a calming box where they keep various sensory objects, what they like. So it could be like the perfume that they love, or like lavender oil. It could be a picture of their friend. It could be something that they can squeeze or something they can fidget with, right? Something that they like to rub. I know one teenager who had a tape of heavy metal, CD of heavy metal music, right? That helped her to calm down. So it has to be something that they like. Chewing gum sometimes, because again, just the taste of that chewing gum helps them to calm down. Another easy tool to use, which is like a stress scale, and you can list events, experiences, people from least stressful and most satisfying to 5, which is most stressful and least satisfying. And first you ask children to just put various aspects of it, and then you use it as a tool to talk to them. And you can use this for any topic. For example, I did it with one teenager for online classes. Okay, and for her, the least stressful, most satisfying was a short school day. She could continue with her studying after the online class was over, and during the online class she could talk to a teacher. And most stressful was that it was difficult to understand some of the explanation, too much of portion, and lots of remembering. On the left-hand side, I asked her to write down solutions. Okay, and this is what she came up with. So, in one page, it's a way to discuss as well as to ask them to come up with solutions. And why ask them? Because you are actually asking their own frontal lobes, okay, to analyze the situation and to find a solution that suits them. Rather than it coming from you, you are not the expert of their lives. Each of us is the expert of our own lives, and the young person is the expert of their life. And if it is something they have thought of, they're much more likely to use it rather than something that's being told to them. My last slide, a few take-home messages. Children and teenagers are really facing the greatest ever threat to their well-being. And as I've explained, this is toxic stress, and it is going to have long-lasting effects. What can we do? Connect, help them to connect, to protect. Okay, and these are the safe and stable, nurturing relationships and environments. So not your SSRIs or your SNRIs, you may have to use those too. However, if we can find the supports within their environment, within relationships which are already existing, strengthen them, that is how we can help them. Build the boss of their brain. Very, very important. We need to build the boss of our brain every day. And most important, please look after yourself. You have to practice self-compassion. There's something known as compassion fatigue. As doctors, we have been dealing with this now for months and months, right? And, the first thing is to neglect yourself because you have to care for others. However, the first thing should be self-compassion and self-care. So, simple way: eat right, move right, sleep right, think right, to feel right. And if you can do this, I think we will all be in a better position to care for the hundreds of people who come to us every day seeking our help. Thank you so much. I know I've hopelessly overshot my time, and I hope we have time for at least a few questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nandita. It was a beautiful lecture, and I think you rightly put it in the right perspective what children today are going through and what they are facing. From the audience, now I would invite questions. But before that, can I ask you one question, Dr. Nandita?
Yes.
Because after having listened to you, I feel probably at some point of time the schools will start. And because of this almost 2 years of a gap and a lack of routine which the children have been facing, and also because of it's very easily said than done that you have online classes, and in many of the rural areas of our Goa itself, I can imagine about the rest of India, but the connectivity is so poor. So nobody is able to judge whether whatever they have been taught has gone across, or has it been assimilated, or how well it has been received by the children. So when they go and join the school, and when they're evaluated along with the children who probably have little more affluence and who are more privileged to access all these privileges of the better connectivity or urban life, how would they react in your opinion? What would happen? How do they react, and what will happen? I mean, that is something which is a very scary situation according to me.
Thanks, Babita. You actually put your finger on, we are going to have a pandemic of learning difficulties once schools open for all the reasons you've mentioned. And a lot of children who are already struggling, they already didn't want to go to school because it was so stressful. They couldn't keep up. You know how quite often teachers were kind of scolding them and, saying mean things and rude things. And now, because of this gap, certainly they're going to fall behind. So I think there are a few things we need to do. One is schools have to be really aware of this problem and take it as like a campaign upon themselves to make sure that children get back into school and learn meaningfully, which would mean you have your list of students already with you. Which are the kids who've not come back to school? And making a personal effort to contact them and find out why aren't they back in school. That's the first thing. Because even families, they may have lost a parent and they've moved out from that place, and there's so much of, distress in the home. The second is, if the child has come into school, for teachers to understand that, for the first month, let's not just dive into the portion and start classes from day one. Let's look at children's emotions. Let's talk about what we've gone through. What have we learned? It may not be academic, but what have we learned about ourselves, about our strengths, about our families, about our community spirit in these 18 months that we've been away? And then I would say they would have to do some kind of reassessment, which would be across the class in terms of, the reading abilities, mathematics, their understanding. And if they're children who, as you say, were from more affluent families who had better access, something like a buddy system or maybe a group, study groups, where you have children of different abilities in the same group. So they're kind of supporting each other, because the teachers may say, how are we going to do this for 60 children? Okay, can you do it for 6 groups of 10 children each? So within that group, there are children who maybe know a little more, remember a little more of what they had covered, and can help the children who have really struggled. So these are some of the ideas, that we could use. Of course, there's more, but yeah, just some of the ideas that can be done to make sure.
I think probably the teachers would require more of counseling and how to deal with this kind of things. I think Dr. Mukul has a question. Dr. Mukul, I think you could say that too. Dr. Priyanka, can you?
There's another question that's put forward by Dr. Cielda. She asks, how much of screen time is okay apart from the classes, really the online classes, and what's the screen time that's permitted?
Yeah, we used to say 2 hours max, 1 hour alone, and
now their classes. Now the classes per se go for 2 hours.
I know. Yeah. So
and kids will watch a mobile and they'll say that I'm just doing my work, So apart from the class.
Yes. So definitely whatever's been recommended, just with the online classes, we far surpassed that, right? So I don't think we can talk in terms of what is recommended, but to make sure that during the whole day, it's not only screens. Because hopefully now with, the opening up, and let's hope that there's a vaccination for children soon, they say move from screen time to green time. So, being outdoors, I think that's so essential. If you can't go out, is there a terrace in your building? Is there a balcony you can go out to? That's really essential. Exercise, again, parents will have to be creative how they can do this indoors. Your daily activities, because you still have to, have a bath, you have to eat your food, you have to have adequate sleep. So having structure in the day, I think, is important. And if you don't have anything else and you're just nagging the children, stop it, don't, put off that phone or close that laptop, you have to have substitutes, which again have to come from the children. Because the older they are, they're not going to listen to you, right? And they say, no, I'm only doing my homework. So, the parent is not going to be sitting there with the child to see which are the sites they're accessing. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any easy 100% solution to this. But certainly talking to the child and finding out what they are interested in, spending time together, even if it's on screen, but at least you're connecting. Because finally, at the end of the day, it's connection. And the screen should not be a cause of disconnection.
Dr. Mukul, can I ask, can you please ask your question?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Yeah, hi, Nandita. What you mentioned about the hand theory, that is very nice. It's a very good way.
Thanks.
I've been seeing a lot of problems with adolescents not adolescents, actually young adults, especially females, even medical students. They have been approaching me with problems where the main thing seems to be the, as I put there, the society is promoting primitive emotions like competition, material success, and this is causing the lot of turmoil. So, is there any way we can, like, in your hand model, actually use neuroplasticity to change that open hand to the closed hand? Is there any specific therapy that you would recommend? Children, they are not very sensitive. The parents don't bring the children that much, but the adults seem to be coming on their own. This is what I have noticed in my practice.
Right.
So what
Yeah,
do you
thanks. I think what you've mentioned is being experienced by everybody across the board, where a lot of adolescents, young adults are facing a lot of mental distress. So I think for the frontal lobe to develop, first of all, is giving children opportunities to think for themselves. Now they can only do this when the frontal lobe is not hijacked. So it's important to do this in the context of, like, not when the problem is happening, because when the problem is happening, they're so stressed out, they're so emotionally reactive, that if we ask them to think of a solution, it'll be, just take the example of the screens. Okay, the parent is saying, you can't spend 8 hours on the screen. Okay, do something else. Like, why are you always on the screen? When your child is upset because you've taken that device away, they're not going to be able to think of what else can I do. So when they're calm, that's the time to help them to problem solve and to give them information. I think one of the ways to build executive functioning is to give people information, that so that they understand why you're saying what you're saying. It's not coming from trying to boss them or from trying to be mean to them. There's a reason, there's a neurobiological reason. So giving young people information so they can understand it better, asking them what they think at a time when they're emotionally calm so they can use their thinking capacity, appreciating their solutions, no matter, like, in some way. Okay, maybe they've said something that is really impossible to do, but at least appreciate, I'm really happy that you're thinking. Okay, and then say, okay, maybe this won't work because of these reasons, but thinking. So giving them that appreciation that they can think for themselves, I think, is another way where we show that confidence. And building connections. I think, again, if you look at all the factors which decrease executive functions, it's like when you're feeling lonely or stressed. So, even if they can, like, not only with family members, the immediate extended family members, friends, okay, neighbors, teachers. So building those connections, making sure sleep is adequate, good nutrition, high protein diet, exercise, which increases dopamine. So it's environmental as well as the actual internal thinking, feeling process, which have to act together.
so if a diagnosis has been made, like a personality disorder or something, it should be revealed to them, to the patient. Would you say
Oh, so
so that
I,
patient
I can't.
understands?
Well, that's a process, right? I mean, I'm talking about mental well-being. As I said, I'm not talking about mental illness. So I won't be able to answer that question. Whether it should be told or not, it would all depend on the circumstances in that family. But let me talk about something that I do know about, which, say something like ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So I personally believe that children and young people should know, and they should be active partners in the whole process of assessment as well as treatment, because it's just respecting who they are. When we explain ADHD to the child and the family, we talk in terms of strengths, because it's your frontal lobe, right? And we know that these children they have like racer car brains. So we say your brain is like a racer car. They're very creative, they're full of energy, they're very curious. If they like something, they will go into it. And whether it's, dinosaurs, or it is, some kind of character that they've, Percy Jackson or whoever it is, they will know a lot about it, right? So it's an interest-based brain. So that's what we tell them, that you have this fantastic, powerful brain, right? And, you can do this, that, and the other. The only difficulty is that this brain has cycle breaks, and that is the impulse control, and that's the frontal lobe. And then we talk about how these cycle breaks are going to kind of cause this racer car brain to crash, and therefore how we can tighten those cycle breaks. So there are ways of explaining this to children in a way that is not doom and gloom. And it starts from a strengths-based approach, that all of us have strengths. Whether you have depression, or you have bipolar disorder, or you have an eating disorder, you have strengths. And that very often, that anxiety or that depression is your way of coping. And I think we need to be trauma informed. So not just the symptom that the person has come with, but go right from their early childhood. Did they face trauma while growing up? And we've given those examples, because this trauma has actually shaped the neuroarchitecture. It is not final, it is not in cement. We know about neuroplasticity, and then we talk about the strengths which can be used in order to build these circuits within the brain and help us to overcome this anxiety through our own actions. Yes, we may need medication, but that's not the be all and end all. We can also build our internal circuits and help ourselves to calm down through mindfulness, through yoga, through jogging, music, whatever it is that is our strength and helps our executive functions to function at their best potential. I hope it's making sense. Sorry, a very long answer to a short question.
Thank you, sir.
Any other questions from the audience? I think if there are no questions, Dr. Priyanka, do you have any question?
No, I think Dr. Nandita's talk was completely self-explanatory, and I loved the concept of the Dan Siegel concept, that flipping the lid thing. It's something that's so unique, I've never heard about it, and the way you put it up, it was fantastic. We never go to think about that aspect of the brain and how it works and how to tackle the anger. And we never go to think about all those things. It was like really fantastic, I think, madam. It's great.
Thank you so much. And they're really good resources, even to teach preschoolers about this hand model. They're like YouTube videos. Okay. And it really works so well to help very young children even understand. And then you can say, like, when they're calming down, like you can say, okay, now, your lid is flipped. Mama's lid is also flipped. Okay, so I'm going to go, to a quiet place and help my, the fingers come down and, take charge of my, kind of my feelings. So it becomes very concrete, and it's something that all of us need, not only children. So it helps for us to remind ourselves. And Dan Siegel's TED Talks, his YouTube videos, his books are absolutely fabulous. Really great stuff.
So I think, Dr. Nandita, what the pandemic has taught all of us, irrespective of the age, that we need to tap our inner strengths, to and all the support system, to tackle these emotional issues, which I think almost all of us have been going through. But hopefully we'll come out of it soon. That's, I think, the mankind hopes always for the best. And I think if nobody has any questions, we'll wind up for the day today. Thank you, Dr. Nandita. Thank you so much for this beautiful lecture and stepwise explanation of how we can tackle this. Thanks to all of you for being here in large numbers to listen to Dr. Nandita. Thank you, Dr. Priyanka. Once again, thanks a lot, Dr. Nandita. Maybe we'll see you again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot to the IMA for giving me this opportunity. I've really enjoyed talking to all of you. Great questions. And of course, Babita, Priyanka, Harshad, you all are always in my team. So thank you for all the support, as well as so many people who referred children to Setu and given us the absolute pleasure and honor of working with some great people and their families. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. All
Thank
of you
you so
will
much.
receive your CME certificates online, those who have attended. Thanks to you, Pintu, and thanks to all of you.
Yes, sorry, Pintu, I forgot you. Thanks for all the support. I'm a tech wreck, so I really appreciate your support.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, bye-bye. Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.